Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like a storm is brewing from a distance on 38 Oxley Road. And I think many Singaporeans will be very interested in what's going on. And let's see what are the events that lead to this, and more importantly, what is likely to happen. So right now, there's a renewed call for 38 Oxley Road to be demolished. Now, for some people who don't know, 38 Oxley Road was the former residence of our ex-Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. And that is going to probably spark off a contentious debate across the nation. And let's see the events leading up, and I'll give you my reflections of the whole thing. Well, the whole thing started when Dr. Lee Wei Ling, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew's daughter, passed away at age 69. She passed away about 2 days ago. She was a very prominent figure in Singapore, and I'll explain why I say she's prominent. And her death was announced by the family. Dr. Lee Wei Ling was a very inspirational columnist who wrote very well. I used to follow her very closely whenever she would write in Straits Times, and some articles are very interesting and truly inspiring. I give you a few examples. She wrote an article many years ago about the day Michael Fay saved me from jail. Well, the story was that Dr. Lee Wei Ling was speeding in US and she was stopped by a police officer. And suddenly the police officer actually asked her, what does Singaporeans think of Americans? And then Dr. Lee replied quite sincerely and said that we like Americans, HP, IBM, and other MNCs that create jobs for us. But Americans probably don't like Singaporeans because we caned Michael Fay. But then the police officer suddenly changed and said, Michael Fay deserved to be caned. He has been causing trouble since he returned to US. This part was quite an interesting conversation. And after that, Dr. Lee is being let go and things like that. And she write a lot of slice of life article commenting on generally life, country, and things like that, which I thought was very interesting. When Mr. Lee Kuan Yew passed away, he wrote an article, What Papa's Death Taught Us About Ourselves, right? And I'll just quote a few things. We need not be concerned about impressing foreigners. Papa thought he was answerable only to people. Now, there's a lot of people who want to impress foreigners. And I think she actually wrote this part of Mr. Lee that we didn't know. We must keep our heritage, respect our culture, language, and our different race, and be proud of Singapore. Never be impressed by the white man who thinks he's superior to you. That is quite true. We are no less or probably more capable than he is. He's talking about white men. If Papa and his old guards colleague did not believe that, they would not have fought for independence and built this nation. We should walk proud with no chips on our shoulder, retain the mutual respect and empathy that we now know we are capable of. It will make life a little easier and interaction a lot more pleasant. Things like that, right? So little slice of life here and there that I thought is important. And you can read on some of these things. I really encourage you all to Google about it. So Dr. Lee contributed very well to the medical world as well. She was a pediatric neurologist, specializes in epilepsy, was the director of NNI. And I thought this was quite interesting. She had a first love for animals, but dissuaded by the parents and went into taking care of children and things like that. So she was a prominent doctor. Now, she was the resident in 38 Oxley Road, and now that she has passed away, my guess is that the house is now empty, and the question of what's going to happen to 38 Oxley Road will come out again. So Mr. Lee Hsien Yang, the brother of both Mr. Lee Hsien Loong and Dr. Lee Wei Ling, have renewed call to demolish the 38 Oxley Road family house. A day after his sister's death, the estranged brother of former Singapore Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong, has appealed to Singaporeans via social media to honor his late father's wish to demolish their family house. Close to midnight on Wednesday, Mr. Lee Hsien Yang published this thing on his Facebook post and said, My father, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and my mother's, Kwa Geok Chu, unwavering and deeply felt wish was for their house, 38 Oxley Road, to be demolished upon the last parent's death. This is something that sparked off a huge debate and potentially even conflict against family members and things like that, and I think this is something of a Singaporeans' concern. I'm very sure many Singaporeans remember the whole event of the friction between the Lee siblings. And that's something quite sad to think that, this looks like a very happy family and things like that. I was very sad. At a point in time when there's just friction, I just wish then that the friction would stop. Okay. And fortunately, it has stopped for many, many years. At that point in time, it's interesting to know that many Singaporeans were pointing fingers at either party. I was in a position where I think is quite unique. Okay. So I was a big fan of Dr. Lee's writing, more or less her fan. I have a huge respect for Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong, then was the Prime Minister. And I personally know Mr. Lee Hsien Yang because I used to work in Singtel and he was my CEO. So I had the honor of working with Mr. Lee Hsien Yang when he was the CEO in Singtel. Of course, he was then very senior, I was very junior. We have a couple of meetings together and I get to see him. He was a powerful speaker, okay, and a very nice, humble man, right? I would say that from what I know of him, he was a very honorable and nice gentleman. I even had a one-on-one lunch with him, right? And this was probably the most stressful lunch I ever had because I was thinking what to say to him and things like that. You know, he's Mr. Lee Hsien Yang and I'm just nobody, right? When I had the lunch with him, I found that he was just an ordinary Singaporean, right? Loves food, loves to talk about business, life, and things like that. He was a nice and honorable gentleman. It saddens me that today he and his wife are residing overseas, and I would use the phrase difficulty to return to Singapore because of the circumstances that I won't need to elaborate. I'm sure he's very, very sad that he cannot be in Singapore to attend Dr. Lee's funeral. And this is something quite crushing in his heart, I suppose. I would just say this, and I think you guys have probably some experience in life, right? Family conflicts are very complicated. It's very easy for outsiders and say he's right, she's wrong, and or she's wrong, she's right, that kind of thing, right? It's very easy to point fingers and take sides and things like that. But the truth is, if you are personally involved, some of these family conflicts are very complicated, very hard for outsiders to understand and take sides. And I'm very sure at that juncture, when the conflict happened, up to today, I would still say, many Singaporeans are very sad at the episode, right? I would say, thank God there is a stop to it already. But now with the renewed call to demolish 38 Oxley Road, this thing might brew again. But I think this is a complicated issue. So what could happen to the house? There was a ministerial committee that's outlined 3 possibilities for the house at 38 Oxley Road. Number 1, retaining it whole. Number 2, retaining just the historical basement dining room where I think some important meetings happen, or allowing it to demolish. Right? That was in 2018. So let's take a look at all the options, shall we? Number 1 is that the committee fleshed out 3 options that are open to a future government. Number 1 is the house could be retained, gazetted for preservation as a national monument or conservation. If it's preserved, then the government will have to acquire a property, rezone it for other use, maybe convert it into a museum or research institute. And if it's conserved, the current owner of the house, which is Mr. Lee Hsien Yang, can continue to live in it, make changes to interior, and even sell it. The second option is just to retain the historical basement of the room where Mr. Lee Kuan Yew hosted important meetings. Right? Under this option, the state would preserve the dining room as a national monument acquired and allowing the rest of the property to be demolished. It's kind of weird now, you know. I don't know how you keep the dining room and demolish the rest, right? The third option is to allow the whole house to be demolished and redeveloped. And I remember Mr. Lee Kuan Yew himself actually said that as well. I remember he personally said that this could be done by the owner, convert it into something else, right? Redevelop a condo or whatever, and could be something else, right? This option would have a significant loss of historical value, but there will be a high commercial value and get out of it, right? Another way is to government acquire it and demolish it and build it into a place, a park or a heritage center, things like that, right? So there are quite a few options here and there. The idea then by ministerial committee is to pass it down to a future government. I would say right now is possibly a future government already. I don't know what could actually happen, right? Interestingly, if you were to look at the living room, and this is a very interesting room, right? You will see that Mr. Lee actually lived very frugally. Very, very frugally. Even when he was the prime minister there, I'm sure he could well afford much better furnitures and things like that, right? Here you see a ironing board. This furnitures, while it is look antique, looks simple, right? And you will see the floors are made of mosaic and things like that, and very humble, very simple thing. That caused me to think a lot about frugality as well. You know, this is a shining example of frugality in the life of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. But anyway, I digress. Currently, right now, with Dr. Lee's passing away, I would say that Mr. Lee Hsien Yang is unlikely to return to Singapore. I don't think anybody in the Lee family will want to stay in the house. Number 1 is, as you can see, it's quite old. Not many people want to stay in a house that's quite old. And if you stay there, you probably become a lightning rod for public contention, right? A lot of people point fingers and things like that. I think everyone was siam as far as possible from this house in the Lee family. So it's getting complicated. So nobody will want to stay there. Actually, there should be a decision made rather than leaving it just empty. I personally don't have an option for any outcome in 38 Oxley Road. I just cringe to think that another outbreak of conflict between the stakeholders could emerge in Singapore over the future of 38 Oxley Road. And it will be quite sad to happen. And when I say stakeholders, could be anyone, it's like could be people, it could be government, it could be family, could be interested party, could be museum, could be anything, right? So I think this is a very, very touchy, prickly topic, and I think this thing might spark off an unnecessary conflict and cause Singaporeans to be distracted again. I would just say this, as Dr. Lee passed on, Singapore should and is mourning over the loss of a good Singaporean. May she rest in peace. But as for 38 Oxley Road, my personal take is that, I don't think there's a need to rush to an outcome, okay? I would be happy for the outcome to be pushed away later than make a decision, maybe even a long, long time. I'm sure certain stakeholders will not be happy. The longer this thing get delayed into a decision, the less I think this thing will become contentious, right? As emotions and feelings and opinions get die out. So I would personally be happier if the decision of the future of 38 Oxley Road get deferred for a long, long time. I don't know about you guys. Now, a lot of people say that they want to honor Mr. Lee Kuan Yew by keeping this very important historical heritage, I would personally prefer, and this is my personal preference, if we rename Changi Airport as Lee Kuan Yew Airport, like you've got JF Kennedy Airport, which is an example, okay? Airports are often named under prominent presidents or country leaders. So I personally prefer Changi Airport. Instead of naming it as the location, okay, name it after Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. I personally prefer that, okay? And rather to keep 38 Oxley Road for remembrance for Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Nobody will go and visit this place. You look at the Huapa Villa and how many people go and visit it, right? All the museums. I don't think much people go and remember it. I think it's important to remember Mr. Lee in our hearts, watch his YouTube videos and read his books, I've read all his books and I watched almost all his YouTube videos that's online. I think that part is probably more real than to see his house. And I don't think the family wants his house to be open up for people to take a look more than the photo that has just been revealed. I think this is some invasion of privacy. I personally think that there should be some form of recognition and remembrance for Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, but probably not his house. So I don't know how you all feel. But I think this is a problem that I wish that could be postponed later and later and later and later and later. And then we just let the emotion over this issue just die off gradually. And hopefully, as we push this decision later and later and later, the final decision will be less contentious and invoke less emotions and good for all stakeholders, right? As for Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, we want to remember him in our deepest recesses of our memories. And as for Dr. Lee, who have passed away, may she rest in peace. And let's just take a moment to remember the contribution of these very incredible people in our country. With this, thank you for watching. Let me know your opinion. Okay, just a casual talk. Remember, like, subscribe, and join us on our Telegram channel. I'll see you in a day or two. Bye-bye.